Hello and welcome back to the free online woodworking school. In this video, we're going to begin cutting the stub tenons on the front rail of this disassembled shaker table. Okay, before we get stuck in, just to address the bit of terminology I use then, stub tenon versus a normal tenon. Don't get hung up on it too much. The reason I'm calling this a stub tenon is because unlike these ones that we cut in the last few episodes, the stub tenons don't have a haunch or anything on them like these ones do. It's just a rectangular nub on the end of a piece of wood in this case. So we've already gone ahead and got these marked out because an absolute necessity of these is that the bottom rail, this mortise and tenon, has exactly the same shoulder lines as the top rail, which we're going to be cutting in the next episode, being the dovetail. As you can see, the size of this dovetail is slightly larger, but the shoulder lines themselves are exactly the same. And also the shoulder lines on this are exactly the same as that of the back rail as well. And so then the drawer that we're going to be fitting later in the series is going to be fitting in a cavity with two parallel walls rather than pinching or widening towards the back. And so if you're joining this series midway through, we covered this marking out process in part 1 or 2, I can't remember. It's up here either way or in the description. Anyway, in the previous parts of this series, I said about cutting the mortise first and then sizing the tenon to fit that. And that's certainly the technique I'd advise you to do if you're doing large mortise and tenons like this, where you've got quite a big surface area, lots of refinement to do in order to get a nice sort of snug fit. You know, these are very structural. I can't even bottom that out yet. It needs a mallet on it. And so cutting these with the mortise first and then sizing the tenons fit is definitely the way to go in the majority of circumstances. With this one, however, the vertical placement of it is so important. We want the underside of it to be perfectly level with the underside of these side rails. Again, this is all kind of planning forward with regards to fitting the drawer, because if this bottom rail is sitting slightly high or slightly too low, it's either going to result in the front of the drawer pinching or kind of wobbling towards the front, which we don't want. And so because this is such a small mortise and tenon, I'm actually going to cut the tenon first and then use that tenon to locate the mortise in the exact location I want it so that it lines perfectly with the rest of the rails. So we've got it in the vise and I'm going to cut directly to these lines. This is a small enough distance that I trust my sawing ability. With larger mortise and tenons like this, I tend to prefer to chisel back to the line just because my sawing can be hit and miss sometimes and I'd rather not risk it. Something like this I feel confident in, but of course, if you'd rather chisel back to the lines, just follow the same steps that we did in the previous episodes. So I'm starting on the back, on the waist side, lowering the saw, tracking the line from back to front. And now I've located it in the end grain. So this kind of thing is going to be difficult to do. And so all I need to do now is make sure I'm cutting down plumb. And for that, I tend to just look at the reflection in the saw blade, because if you're going in at an angle, you can see that it sort of distorts that reflection and you know that you're going off course. So that looks pretty good. So just making sure we're getting right down to that shoulder line, and we'll cut these as well directly to the line. And always remember to do long strokes with the saw. That'll get you the most amount of control when just cutting wood in general. Now we're going to cut the shoulders off, and I'm going to leave half a millimeter or so to chisel back to, because we want these to be nice and crisp. One tenon done, kind of. Still got the chiseling to do. Okay, so now we've just got to work our way back to these shoulder lines. We've got about a millimeter to do, so I'm going to try and chisel away half the material first and then go into the shoulder line. I'll be very careful when chiseling back to these lines. As always, I'm looking along the shoulder line to make sure I am chopping down square, because if you try and undercut this, for example, it might look good on this face, but the undercut's going to show on here, which could in fact be the front face. So always look down the shoulder line and make sure that you're cutting at 90. Okay, so the tenons are cut. If you've done all the projects in the free online woodworking school up until this point, such as the Dovetailed Box, the cabinet and the Toolbox, that should be pretty straightforward. So next, what we want to do is get the front legs. So in this case, it's A and F for me. And we're going to get the corresponding rail and get it assembled. You may remember when cutting these mortise and tenons, we left it so there was a little bit of up and down adjustment. So this is where we're going to make use of that. I'm just going to tap this slightly on the bottom to get this seamless on top. And now, let me just flip this around so you can see. This is still the front leg, but you're looking at it from the inside now. This is where the stub tenon's going to be going. We want to transfer the location of the underside of this rail to the inside face of this front leg, because the underside of this tenon rail needs to be perfectly in line with the underside of this. So those two faces need to be the same height. To do this, I'm just going to get my square, butt it up against the inside, really sharp pencil, square it across. So we've got a really fine line there. Move it round and we will transfer that to this front face. So there we go, you can see that fine line there transferring around to the inside face of the front leg. You can ignore that rough looking line. We drew that during the mortise and tenon phase to make sure that we marked within the boundaries of what the tenon was going to be hiding. So that one's done. We'll just get the other one sorted now. So get it flush on the top. So then this is the face where the mortise is going. Again, get the square up against the underside of the rail and mark round. Okay, so this is where it gets fun. So firstly, make sure you've got the right component, J and J. I know that this is going to be going in there. And remember, this line that we've drawn is not where the mortise is going. It's where the underside of the component is. So the mortise, if you're looking at it, will be slightly to the right-hand side. The other thing to note here is if you're following the plans, the mortise is slightly offset to one side. The reason for that is because this rail is flush with the inside face of the leg. There's about a 5mm step on the front. And what the offset on the tenon allows it to do is still locate the mortise in the middle of the leg. So don't accidentally get this round the wrong way, or else you'll end up with a really thin wall on this inside face. So because we know this inside face is going to be flush, we can actually use that to our advantage. If we set a marking gauge up, referencing from the inside edge of the tenon and butting it up against the backside of the tenon, we can lock that off and mark from the inside of the leg a small line just above the white line that I've drawn, because I know that's where the tenon's going, to mark the inside wall of the mortise. We can then check that. So if I line up the inside face, I can see that the marking gauge line lines up perfectly with this first face of the mortise. We'll then do it again, extend the marking gauge out to hit the far wall of the tenon, lock it down, and mark once again from the inside face to give you your second line. Again, check it, get it flush on the inside face, confirm that those measurements look good. So you can see both marking gauge lines line up perfectly with the tenon, and this sort of edge on the left here will be flush once that's bottomed out. So that's the kind of forward and backward location sorted. Next, we need to do the up and down location. And so then what we're going to do is just fold it back, and then I'll actually use a square here to line it up with that white line, butt this up against the square, and then if we just hold that in position, I can put a little mark either side where the top and the bottom of where that mortise needs to be, and then we can just square those across. Scribble out the waste. Should be pretty obvious, but, and then once again, just double check. So lay it on there, looks to be pretty good. I can see that if I line it up with the tenon, that inside face is going to be perfectly flush. And so now I can see that that mortise is in the perfect location so that the underside of the shoulder line of this is perfectly in line with the shoulder line that's going to be coming out of this mortise. So I'm going to do the other leg now, hopefully do it all in one take so I can show you the whole process. Okay, so here's the inside face. This is the face where the mortise is going. We've got component I going in here. And so the first thing that we're going to do is get the back faces aligned, and we're going to set that marking gauge up. Give ourselves one line, reset it to the far side of the tenon. Give ourselves the second line. So there's our front to back location sorted. And now just confirm I and I. Fold it back, get a square to line up with that white line I just drew. Hold everything in position. Give yourself 2 marks for the height of the tenon, and then square those across. Okay, so there's our 2 mortises marked out. We can visually see that they're pretty symmetrical. They land right in the middle of the width of the leg, and hopefully are ready to move to the next stage. So these are the kind of mortises that I would drill out. They're kind of too small to use something as brutal as a mortise chisel like we used in the last episodes. So I'm going to find a drill bit that's just slightly narrower than the smallest distance in this mortise. So that's probably going to be an 8mm drill bit. We'll drill out the majority of it and then chisel back to the lines to get us a nice square, clean inside face. Generally, it's going to be better to use a brad point drill bit for something like this because it's going to give you much more accurate location and will give you a flatter base just straight off the drill bit rather than one with a cone pointed one that sort of leaves divots all over the place. So we're just going to pop a little bit of tape around this bit at the same depth as the tenon, maybe just slightly past to account for any kind of debris. Okay, and then I'm going to try and get as close as I can to at least 3 of the lines. And then I might see if I can drill out the rest with just a smaller drill bit. Might as well get rid of as much as we can. Okay, one done. Right, so that's where we're at with both mortises. Doesn't matter if the holes are joined or not, we're going to be chiseling it out anyway. So when chiseling back to these lines, you want to work back to the ones on the top and bottom of the mortise rather than the ones at the side. Because if you start working your way back to the ones on the side, there's a chance that you could split outside the boundaries of the mortise and also the shoulder of the tenon as well. And so it'll be exposed on a show face. Whereas if you're working on these lines, because you're working across the grain, as long as you're not taking off too much, there's no chance it's going to split outside. And so you can chop back to these lines, work all the way to these corners, and then when it comes to chopping back to these lines on the sides, the grain's already been cut above and below the area that you're chiseling, therefore it's not going to split out beyond. So we'll start with this one, just chiseling down till we hear that sound change, then we know we're bottomed out. Work our way back. And so now we're in the line of the mortise wall. Do the same this side. Just sort of break out what we can. So this is where we're currently at. Again, you still don't want to be chiseling to the walls at this point because we haven't severed the grain above and below it. We want to work our way back into those corners. So I'll just use the kind of edge of the chisel here, sort of working diagonally into that corner. And now we are in the corner. And I'll just do the same on the top here. So now the grain has been severed above and below. We can put our chisel into what's left of that line. And I'm actually going to spin it around so I can see if I'm chopping down square or not. Get it into the line. And you can see that we didn't split outside the boundaries of that mortise. Try and break this out. You can see I'm levering against the wall that I've still got meat on. And if it's not separating at the bottom, just go down again and try and sever the grain a bit more. There you go. So I'll just work on this other wall now. Work down to the corner first. And then once that grain has been severed from above and below, chop along the grain in order to cut the side walls. Just very lightly levering here. Just kind of scrape out all the remaining fluffy bits that are left. And just remember, if something isn't coming out too easily, it's because it's still attached somewhere. So just try and pare it from all sides rather than push something too far. Okay, so that's J we've just done. Let's give it a mush and see what it's like. Beauty. Perfectly flush. Holds itself, and you can just about see the white line below that it lines up perfectly with. Very happy with that. So now we should be able to get this table assembled, or at least dry assembled, because we've still got a dovetail to do at this point. There you go. It's always nice when it sort of holds itself together. You know you've done an all right job. So there we go. Front rail in. It's looking like it's in the perfect location vertically. Closes really nicely with just hand pressure on the shoulder lines. That's also another good way of checking if you've done your job correctly. While you could rely on clamps to mush things shut, if you can do it with your hands, then you know that clamps aren't going to be adding any sort of undue tension on your piece of work. So yeah, that's turned out pretty good. In the next episode, we are going to be doing the lap dovetail for the front of the leg. And then once we've done that, that's all the carcass joinery complete, and we can begin shaping this table and preparing it for glue up. So as always, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to press the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one.